because I was so aware of what the American people expected and what Congress expected, and because I cared so much about this, that I believe that the actions we took outside of the TARP with regard to the GSEs and the national standard they set has the potential to touch more and do more than we might have achieved if we used all $700 billion to buy illiquid assets. So we are working. I understand the point. I know what you would like to see us do, but I just wanted to make that point there.
Thank you. Let me say this. There's been quite a lot of things said, Chairman Bernanke, that over $2 trillion worth of emergency loans to institutions and the identity of those assets that you've taken back. You've always advocated, as the Secretary and this committee, transparency. I know you're refusing to disclose the names of those institutions or the composition of those assets. Is that a short-term, I'll call it a refusal to disclose, or is that, when do you anticipate letting the public know?
Congressman, I think there's been some confusion about what this involves.
Sure.
The Federal Reserve, like all other central banks, has short-term collateralized lending programs to financial institutions. We've always had that. The main difference is we've extended it to primary dealers as well as depository institutions. It's open to any bank that comes to our window. We take collateral, we haircut it. It's a short-term loan. It's very safe. We've never lost a penny in these lending programs. Now, some have asked us to reveal the names of the banks that are borrowing, how much they're borrowing, what collateral they're posting. We think that's counterproductive because, for two reasons. First, the success of this depends on banks being willing to come and borrow when they need short-term cash. There's a concern that if the name is put in the newspaper that such and such bank came to the Fed to borrow overnight, perfectly good reason, that others might begin to worry, is this bank creditworthy, and that might create a stigma, a problem, and might cause banks to be unwilling to borrow, and that would be counterproductive for the whole purpose.
So these are banks which have good, sound CAMEL ratings?
Yeah, we only lend to good quality banks. We lend on a recourse basis. That is, they post both post-collateral, and if the collateral were to be insufficient, then the bank itself is still responsible. We've never lost a penny doing this. I think it's a totally standard practice for central banks around the world, and it's very constructive to provide liquidity to the financial system.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I heard you use the comment in response to a question just a little while ago, turning the corner. And it's a quotable phrase, I think. It reminds me of another famous phrase, return to normalcy. And it sort of scares me if you look at the context of when return to normalcy was used. I think there's a crisis of confidence that's in the general public and within this body of the Congress. And we're trying to figure out, those of us that extended ourselves on the vote for the bailout and the 180-degree change that you made in policy from buying bad assets to injecting investments of equity in banking institutions. I don't fault you for it. It just was an extreme change and rather shocking. And it wasn't your idea. It was the idea of the drafters of the legislation that you sent up in the form of a 3.5-page draft, and we converted after several weeks to 400 pages. And part of those 400 pages gave you the authority to make that 180-degree change. Now, my problem is that has happened once, and now suddenly I see other things occurring where you make 180-degree changes in policy. One example is this thing we're struggling with this week, the potential bankruptcy or collapse of our auto industry in the country. And it seems that there's a dual idea, either at Treasury or at the White House, that if you take the $25 billion out of a certain qualified funds, then it is necessary and should be used, and obviously would avoid systemic risk. The underlying principle, we shouldn't do it unless there's systemic risk. But if you were to use monies from the TARP fund, that's unacceptable to the White House and Treasury and should not be done. And it seems to me when you're treating a disease, you don't decide where the disease came from. You decide what is the prognosis, the likely prognosis, and then you take action. So there's a lack of confidence, it seems to me, both in this body and in the general population. They want to get some idea, do we have a plan? Where are we going? To say turning the corner really is not terribly significant. It's no different than Herbert Hoover said, return to normalcy. And it's getting frightful to the people. Why can't this Treasury and this White House lay out a plan that takes into consideration all the contingencies that will happen or may happen, and what our potential response will be, knowing full well mistakes will be made, money will be unreasonably or foolishly expended. But we all tend to agree that if in fact we are on the precipice of a disaster, a meltdown, we're willing to take those opportunities. But we don't want to walk into a room of darkness. We really want you to shed as much light in that room before we take the leap over the threshold. So I'm sort of calling upon you. Can you now give us some indication? Do you consider the loss of the American auto industry as significant and systemic risk, or don't you? If we lose 3 million jobs, what would it cost to make it up? What would be the loss of revenue? And would it be worth spending $25 billion initially to stop that from occurring? And if we don't do that, what is our backup plan? And what do we intend to do? It seems to me that if we're going to build confidence among our constituents, the American people, and confidence within this institution to respond to your requests and the White House requests just over the next 60 days and then the next administration, it seems to me we have to be a little more forthcoming.
Well, then let me be very, very forthcoming to you, because the intent of the TARP when we came here was to stabilize the system, prevent a collapse. That's what we talked about. We talked about the financial system. And what I've said today here, I was very careful when I said what turning the corner meant. I said I believe that that meant that we have stabilized the financial system and prevented a collapse. I was also very clear in saying we have a lot of work ahead of us, and the recovery of the financial system is a lot of work to get the markets going again. So now let's look at the TARP. When we came here, the purpose was that, getting capital in the financial system. We came forward with the strategy was buying illiquid assets. That was the strategy. The purpose was clear. We worked with Congress, and we wanted those additional authorities. Don't forever believe that we did not want. We were working to maximize the authorities we have and the tools we have. And when the facts changed and the circumstances changed, we changed the strategy. We didn't implement a flawed strategy. We implemented a strategy that worked. Now, to get to your question, and I think what the American people need in terms of confidence is a realistic assessment of where we are, sticking with what our objective was to begin with. Now, look at the autos. Again, you haven't seen any lack of consistency on my part with regard to the autos. The TARP was aimed at the financial system. That's what the purpose is. That's what we talked about with the TARP. Okay, now in terms of autos, I have said repeatedly, I think it would be not a good thing. It would be something to be avoided, having one of the auto companies fail, particularly during this period of time. We have asked Congress, and Congress is worked to deal with this. But I believe that any solution be a solution that leads to long-term viability, sustainable viability here. And so, again, I don't see this as the purpose of the TARP. Congress passed legislation that dealt with the financial system stability. And again, there are other ways. And, you also appropriated money for the auto industry on the Department of Energy bill, 136. And, another alternative may be to modify that. But
the gentleman from, who's next? Gentleman from Texas.